Was this movie sort of, in your eyes, the close to a very turbulent and sometimes highlight-packed chapter in the DC history?
I think the box office kind of made it at the end. I think that if people wanted the continuation of this universe, they should have gone to it. Because I think that it could have continued or it could have closed, and I think this closed it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Aftershow. My name is Mark Ellis, and today's episode is all about The Flash. We're going to do a deep dive into the details of the movie, answer some of the burning questions that it left, and as always, we're talking spoilers. So if you've not yet seen The Flash, make sure you check it out, and then come on back here and join me and Coy Jandreau, our special guest today, who loves all things Flash, loves all things comic books. This young man, on any given week at his local comic book store, has upwards of 75 different issues that you're getting?
Yeah, I read between 68 and now 77 comics a week. So that puts me in the about 300 comics a month range, which frankly is a bit much even for The Flash. It's beautiful. I love it. I'm happy. But I see the problem. It's like when you go to Vegas and you're like, I got this. I'm winning.
Yeah. You think about how much money those issues cost, and you think about a credit card and what my current limit is.
I know it's my job, and some of it's tax deductible, but do I have a problem? Should I call someone? Is there a Comics Anonymous?
Well, luckily, this is where all that knowledge gets put to use, because we're going to be talking about the film, and also there's going to be a lot of spoiler territory. But before we get into any of that, Coy, I'm just curious, because as we're filming this, we're seeing the box office results come in from the past weekend. It's opening weekend, $55 million domestically, maybe tack on another 50 to 60 million worldwide. What was behind this performance, or lack thereof, in your opinion?
I think it's the perfect storm. I think this is going to be studied for years in a lab. I think that so many things went wrong at once. I think there's a combination between, I wouldn't consider it superhero fatigue. I would consider it like a shift in expectation. I don't think we have a fatigue. I think we now have a higher bar. I think that the superhero culture used to rely on like, what a novel idea, comic book movie? We're 15 years in, 20 years in. We should really acknowledge that it's not a novelty anymore. If a movie's going to do well, it needs to be quality, as well as have certain other expectations. I would argue a lot of people look at comic book movies as a lesser. I think they have more to do. They have to be a good movie. They also have to appeal to a devout fandom. They have to appeal to the actual regular demographic, and they have to advertise in a way that somehow spoils everything and nothing. I consider superhero movies a more hard to accomplish task than they were 5 years ago, and I'd say they're harder to accomplish now than a low to mid-budget film. I think high-budget films are in their own problem area right now because we're throwing money at everything and the budgets are getting too high. But I think that a quality mid-budget film is actually more likely to profit now than a standard comic book movie. And so I think that we have the fatigue adjacent problem, but about quality, not just generalizing it. I think we have James Gunn and Peter Safran taking over at a time where they had to, but the way they announced it put people in a position of not knowing expectations. As a comic fan, James Gunn coming out and being like, these comics are what we're adapting, and showing a loyalty and showing us is the best thing to get my expectations up for 2 years from now. But the people that are Snyder fans, the people that are DC EU fans, the people that have been fans of the material that's only on their screens feel betrayed, and then they feel like, why would I go support the thing that isn't helping me, even though inherently those are the characters they want to support. Like it's contradiction. They're like, I'm mad at this thing that is a love letter to my thing, because the movie's a love letter to the thing. And then on top of that, you've got the lack of press tour because of the real life legal ramifications of a lead actor. You've got the lack of ability to talk about the movie to scale, because if you've got one actor filming a movie that is, in the Ben Affleck of it all, you've got another actor that doesn't do a lot of press in general in Keaton. So there's two of your three leads.
Right.
You've got one actor that plays two parts that isn't able to do press, and then you've got the powerhouse of the movie for me, Sasha Kaye, who's doing all the press, that is the least known. So it's a perfect storm of the one we don't know that's great, but you don't know they're great yet, is coming out to say they're great, and this thing that you don't know is great.
I was going to say, as you're describing all these different reasons for the box office, I'm thinking of that wave in The Perfect Storm.
100%.
You're the boat, and you're trying to make it over it.
Tip of the wave, the last bit, Spider-Verse.
When you're describing a comic book movie in general, this seems to have a lot of the ingredients that you would want in a modern one, because before, if this was Batman 1989, this was Superman 78, even Iron Man in 2008, you can open a movie movie big on a single superhero and have them be the star. But this had that team up quality, and boy, did they sell it on that premise, where you could argue that most folks who paid to see this movie might have been going to see a Batman, most likely Michael Keaton's Batman, in addition to the fact that the Flash was actually the title character.
Right.
So let's get into the actual movie itself. Overall, you're walking out of the theater, and I just put a mic in your face. What are you saying about this movie?
I had a very positive experience. I was so joyous. I was so happy. For me, the movie was what summer blockbusters are meant to be. Is implies there are things that are wrong, but the way I want to feel is how I left this movie. I want to have spectacle. I want to have joy. I want to have heart. My big problem with a lot of superhero fodder is it becomes fodder. It becomes literally a do these XYZ, here you got a movie. This actually had heart on top of the XYZ, which is what I really want. I felt for his mom. I felt for his strife. I felt for the contradiction of the trolley problem to this scale. I thought it was a genius way to make a hero. The trolley problem is a classic idea of morality, and they did it to a multiversal scale. Do you save one mom or the multiverse? And they made the guy kill his mom.
It's a tough call. It is a tough
story.
Call.
So to me, it had all of the things, and then it had the spectacle of bringing back nostalgia. It had a lot of visuals that, though everything didn't work for me, more did than didn't. And it introduced one of the hardest characters to introduce in the comic books. Kara is in Kal-El's shadow because she's the cousin of Superman. That's already hard. Now you've got the real life, oh my God, in the shadow of Henry Cavill, during a recast, new actress that's from a soap opera, as far as I know, the only thing they've done, and they're a shining light in this movie. So I walked out going like, I just made a new star. I got to see an incredible acting tour de force of two actors playing opposite each other in a hero's journey. Like a Jungian hero's journey opposite itself is so genius because you've got the arc of the young Barry that reflects the early films that a lot of people were like, that's not Flash, that's an annoying character, literally kind of being fan serviced to be annoying. You've got the more mature Barry who's gone through his own hero's journey because of the drama and trauma of losing his family, educating himself on what it's like to have to mature, and therefore you've got the comedy that works twice over, so every punch lands twice. And I thought it all worked.
Seeing the Barrys sort of mature themselves as elder, I call them elderberry, but it's also it's like, and there's a lot of member berries in this movie too. So there's a lot of berries going on.
A lot of berries moving
in the Flash. As we said before, 85% is the audience score with a 66% tomato meter, which is still kind of fluctuating as more reviews come in. The critics' consensus on Rotten Tomatoes is The Flash is funny, fittingly fast-paced, and overall ranks as one of the best DC movies in recent years. So if you're looking at this movie, I thought the pacing was tremendous.
Yeah.
Ironically, the slowest this movie got was when the Flash, and we show Flash slowing down because Flash is so incredibly fast that they could just do all these things, just like putting babies in microwaves. The actual watching that play out was so slow.
Yeah.
And it was so weird that I'm like, can we just speed this up a little? The guys, I understand that it's the Flash slowing all this stuff down for us who can't experience how fast it is, but still, I don't mind if I'm not a huge fan of kids. I don't like seeing babies in microwaves. That was too long for me to see a baby in a microwave.
That's a long beep.
And you see a lot of stuff with the visual effects, and it's never gonna bother me that much anymore because so much. We grew up in the era of practical effects, and you see the CGI, which was never quite ready to match the filmmaker's vision, with very few exceptions. And I think that that's sort of the case here. But I think a lot of it, once you get into with Barry running that fast, that he can literally turn time back, and we get into that vortex. I thought actually that was more of an artistic choice than a visual effects one. Am I wrong here?
Andy Muschietti's been very public about choosing to film that way, and it also adds the horror elements that he's most known for. There's a bit of an uncanny valley to his work where it's like that uncomfortability of a visual. So to me, it makes more sense to have a vortex of time like this than like a space hole, which they even joked about in the movie. There's those moments. But like, what do you represent space-time with? It worked for me. I would have liked a little bit more of a photorealistic choice, but it did feel like a choice. So it didn't bother me because I was like, oh, it's a stylistic thing. That wasn't where the heart was. The heart is in the rest of the movie, so I didn't mind that. If that was how things looked that needed to be like, oh no, we've lost mom, that would have bothered me. But since it was in a very stylized, literal dome, I wasn't as affected emotionally.
And seeing the storyline, you're never going to be able to avoid comparisons to how the Marvel's been utilizing their multiverse versus DC. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But for right now, let's just talk about the Barry of it all, where I felt like at times, and Ezra Miller, if you separate art from artist and you're just looking at this film and their performance in it, tremendous, but two Barrys on screen, I'll say something positive, I'll say something negative. It was a lot. It was a lot to take that sort of energy twice over.
Can't imagine two me's.
But as a credit to both the performance and the direction of the film, I saw this movie at CinemaCon. It was the first time I got to see it. And, they came out and they said, we're really excited. It's not quite finished. And so we're looking at, well, maybe is it the effects? Is it something else? But it took me 30 minutes into the film to realize, oh my God, I'm watching two Ezra Millers.
Yeah.
Like, it was so natural.
Yeah.
The way that Ezra played off themselves that I had to, this was not watching Van Damme play twins in Double Impact.
No,
this was so seamless that I forgot I was watching one performer do two parts.
And a director direct a movie twice.
Yeah.
That was so incredible to me. If you actually break down what goes into this, every actor had to act off two people, one of which isn't there. The director has to direct a young Barry movie and an elder Barry movie. You've got to go through this entire journey, and it's not like they don't affect each other. It's not like it's just dialogue. These are emotionally resonant moments that grow both characters. And then if you think about the actual conclusion of the film, the third Barry only works because of the lessons the elder Barry taught young Barry. So the third Barry only exists because of the success of those two. If there was any acting that didn't work with young Barry or elder Barry, the young choice doesn't get to grow, and then the eldest choice doesn't get to sacrifice himself to be this evil that is willing to be it, and then the middle Barry doesn't get to physically sacrifice himself in order to save the multiverse because of the lessons learned from elder Barry. It doesn't work unless everything hits exactly right, and that's why I hate the hate for this film, is because there's so much nuance that isn't discussed. That's a genius series of parables. That's a lot.
And so, and I thought, well, one of the smart things, and this may just be the comedian side of me, is that I appreciate a good callback. And so seeing who the villain presence actually was, that it actually was a version of Barry, I thought that was pretty well handled. And I was like, okay, I left the theater like, okay, so we had Zod, we had the presence of Michael Shannon here, but we also had we're kind of fighting ourselves. And given the movie and how it played out with Barry sort of wrestling against what do I do? Do I save my mom? Do I just let the multiverses be? I thought that was the perfect villain choice for the third act.
And isn't every superhero story really man against self? And that's the genius of this one, is it's man against self times 3. It's man against his own annoying self. It's man against the decision. It's man against his physical self. It's literally the ultimate hero's journey. And I honestly think it delivered on that more than anyone's giving it credit for. I think it honestly, Andy Muschietti had the impossible task of, we talked about a perfect storm marketing. Andy Muschietti had to film this movie over how many years and put it together and change rewrites and change studios and change executives. There's 3 different filmed endings to this movie, and it still doesn't feel like 5 movies. It feels like he made a movie. If this was a lesser director, which is why I'm so excited for his Batman, he was able to make this out of paper mache. There's so many pieces that are we're gonna glue it and see what happens. That's insane.
I don't put a lot of stock in you had 6 years to make this movie. This was like, you knew you had 6 years to do your science project in 5th grade. And then the week before it was due, the teachers completely changed. They said, oh, by the way, kids, you can't do the volcano.
Yeah,
you gotta do something other than the volcano. And it's I've been building a volcano for the last 5 years. Now I got to do a Bunsen burn. This is something totally different.
And that's actually one of the scenes they cut. Henry Cavill fighting a volcano. They show it one of the things. But that is actually the thing. Is you cut the guy that is your marketing. You cut Henry Cavill from everything because you don't want to confuse the audience. And then you make a great joke to make the audience go no, that's not what's going forward. And now the audience goes, wait, is he going to be our new Batman? I'm like, no, that was the point of using him. It's so interesting. I cannot imagine being Andy Muschietti and going, okay, I'm going to make this very strong decision to ensure the audience is very clear that this multiverse is still a problem. And now half the articles I read is how George Clooney is going to impact Batman. I'm like, that's not the thing.
That was a bit of a surprise for me seeing it the second time, because when I saw it at CinemaCon, they did not have the post-credit scenes. And so seeing that, I was like, well, this is new and fun.
It wasn't finished.
Hey, look at this. But what impresses me about this movie, and I certainly have my criticisms, I actually think the tomato meter score as of now, 66%, I'm like, that's right where I probably would land with this film. But what I will say, the impressive job this movie did is being such a ride for the most part, where to the point where I even think it's to the detriment of an actress like Sasha, where it's like you just didn't have enough time. You got to fight a lot. You didn't have enough time to really show us, because I think that Supergirl was underserved in this film. But I loved seeing how fast the movie could move at points, but then also slow down, not too slow with the Flash stuff, but when we get that final goodbye between Barry and his mom, I thought that emotionally really packed a wallet.
I think there's so many scenes that are akin to that do better than other movies trying for the same thing. I think that's definitely a highlight, but even the comedic elements of explaining the multiverse through spaghetti, which we're going to talk about, is genius. But also the scene where you discover the multiverse by a name drop about an in our universe multiverse joke. Like, we talk about Eric Stoltz all the time.
Right.
Like, the Mandela effect and Eric Stoltz are buddies. Like, that joke being how we're informed of the multiverse, and then landing that joke with a thigh tattoo that's actually on a calf. Like, there's so much good humor in this that, like, Marty McFly, dumbest joke ever that I adore.
Funny.
It's such a bad good joke.
The roommates got me.
That whole scene was slow and trusted the audience to be like, okay, we need to breathe a second. It's like when you're watching a horror movie and there's a joke that makes you laugh just to let your diaphragm like spasm a little, where you're like, okay, I needed that. Like, this movie let you have those moments of like, okay, we've been running a lot. Let me stop running. And that is the power of, like, two Ezras, they're a lot and they know it. So they let the audience go, okay, I literally am exhausted from running. Comedy, but it serves the narrative and it suits his comedy. So this movie never feels like, I mean, in stand-up, you have so many different types of comedians. Sometimes comedy feels like 5 writers wrote it. To me, this all felt like one type of comedy that served the movie.
And to be honest, and we've seen this in the MCU too, there's a lot of times when anytime you're dealing with time travel or even a multiverse, you're going to get a Back to the Future joke. Yeah. And they work better than others. And so just, we're the same. If there's a big news story, every comic is going to have their angle on it. I thought this angle on referencing Back to the Future worked pretty well. And I'll also give a huge shout to Saoirse Monica Jackson from Dairy Girls, who is also one of Barry's pals, is sort of in the roommate clique.
Yeah.
And she is just so fantastic with her comedic timing. And so just a great supporting role in there. But if you're talking about support for The Flash, we're looking for anybody that can help us that he knows from the Justice League. Wonder Woman ain't there.
Nope.
Aquaman's not picking up the phone. Who do we call? Okay, Batman. Is there a Batman in this universe? There is, or at least there was, and we don't really know what's going on with bats now. So we show up to Wayne Manor, and it ain't Ben Affleck anymore. We got to see it at the beginning of the movie, and now we get Michael Keaton, a very different looking Batman than even we saw in 92 when we left him with Batman Returns. What the hell happened to Batman? Well, actually, it's good news, kids. Gotham City is clean. It's safe. You can take your family there again and you won't get murdered leaving the theater. The problem is Batman has just let himself go. There's no more Alfred taking care. Apparently Grubhub does not deliver to Wayne Manor. He's still got to cook his own spaghetti.
I love that in the comic books they use Batman all the time because it sells. But I love in this movie that using Batman actually feels like a character motivation. I was so afraid.
And it sells.
And it sells.
And it works as a Super Bowl commercial.
But I was worried about that the whole time. But then if you actually look at what Barry's journey is it worth losing everything to save my parents? Is that not Batman's journey? What a great pairing that doesn't always land that well in the comics. Sometimes it's like, okay, so Flash is not doing so. I could put Batman on the cover, maybe Batman. And I was so worried the movie would feel like, maybe just throw some Batman. But they did such a good job with Michael Keaton and his emotional vulnerability as Batman being like, you did the thing I always wanted to do. And like, since he's Michael Keaton, it's so cool when he's like, I just couldn't do it. I couldn't land it. And I love that that's translated with like 2 lines of dialogue. And then you've got him being a recluse because of never actually accomplishing the goal that he set out to do. He cleaned up Gotham. It didn't make him whole. But then you juxtapose that with Ben Affleck, who's still an older, grizzled Batman who admits he's lonely. And basically his last line in this entire universe is going to be like, maybe next time. Yeah. Like, you've got this duality of broken men, one who's accomplished the goal, one who hasn't, but both can never feel whole because of the thing that Barry did accomplish that has to let go. So it's this beautiful triangle of just sorrow and broken men who have to accept that as the way life goes on. And they each teach themselves that lesson the same way the 3 Barrys teach themselves that lesson.
And in the same way that I enjoyed day drinking to Chicago's 25 or 6-4 and meeting Michael Keaton that way, you still don't know what you're getting with this Batman. As far as like, is this going to be like a sort of drunken mentor? Is it going to be like a Doc Brown?
Yeah.
Or are we actually going to get our hands dirty? And just seeing how much action '89 Batman
Yes.
got to do, I was thrilled. It was one of the highlights of the movie for me. As a kid who one of my first theater experiences was seeing Batman in 1989.
And we got to see it with today's technology, but I also love that it didn't feel like that Batman used today's technology. I love
he
that like
still had trouble turning the neck in
He's
that, in that
with the
suit.
Flash Jokers.
Yeah.
I also love that they used the technology of then as if he retired like 5 years later. Like he retired in 97. Like I love that he's still to be like, what's your weight? Not only is that a great callback, it shows he didn't improve much stuff. And it gives us a moment to be like, how's this Batman doing today? And then when he's fighting the Kryptonian, I love that's also a giant comic book metaphor because he's literally fighting a giant. Batman's always been the underdog. So it's like the giant versus your guy connection. But if you think about Batman, the mythos that Snyder was able to do, Batman's always been distrustful of Kryptonians. How fitting is it that a Kryptonian takes out Batman, and Batman wouldn't have had kryptonite in this universe because he wouldn't have been prepared. They always say Batman can defeat anyone if he has enough time to prepare.
Batman is like
retired.
Bill Belichick as a
100%.
coach. Like if you give him time to prepare, he
gets
can
the rings.
figure out how to scheme against your quarterback. But if you just show up to play in a sandlot somewhere, which unfortunately for superheroes, that's a lot of their job is not being prepared and having to just move on the fly. And so it actually speaks to the cast of this movie that you do need not just one superhero, maybe not just 2 or 3 superheroes. You need a whole gaggle to go fight whatever the menace is. And so we adventure with Batman. We realize, okay, this guy's committed. And not like I had any hesitancy. This was 10 years ago. I might have walked into this movie being like, is this going to be Keaton, or is he just kind of showing up for the paycheck to say a couple lines that we know and we'll clap and then we'll get out of here? But no, that was Keaton invested in this character in sort of finishing the arc that I'll even put Birdman in. And then we meet Supergirl. Yeah. And now we're all fighting this together. And that's when the movie started to just go at such a breakneck pace that I was enjoying all the action, but I was missing some of the character stuff from the first half of the film until we got that grocery store scene.
I agree, and I do feel like Sasha Calle did absolutely everything she could with her screen time, but if there was one character to give another scene to, it's her. I think Supergirl...
So much potential. It was kind of like how I felt about Ray Fisher walking out of the Joss Whedon. You
can see all the pieces. You're like, but I want the puzzle.
Exactly. I want more from that character. I'm ready for the standalone.
Yeah, I think that they're making a standalone Supergirl movie. It's intentionally in a different universe, but if any character works, imagine a Supergirl in the comics that they're adapting. Supergirl is mourning the loss of kryptonite. She's mourning the loss of everything, and she was raised on an asteroid. So it's a great nurture versus nature story with Superman's raised by Mom and Pa Kent, the ultimate good. This girl's raised by herself and alone, and she's still good, but she's rough around the edges. But that S standing for hope means more to me with Supergirl than Superman, to be honest, because Superman's got every reason to love humanity. This girl doesn't. So I love the idea that Supergirl is just inherently good, and that's even more powerful. So what better way to have a girl lost in space movie that is Woman of Tomorrow than like, I lost my whole universe. Barry messed everything up. I'm by myself. And like, I just started liking humanity, and now I'm trapped in this position. I would love to see her get to be the full movie we all felt and wanted, because again, she had to fill in the giant shoes of Henry Cavill first. No one has had to be Superman yet since Henry Cavill. She had to be Supergirl, who less people identify with, who less people know, and she had to be the first person to don the S since Cavill in a movie that's referencing Cavill.
It's a
That's
lot
an
of pressure.
impossible task.
Oh, and by the way, you're not going to be the only super person that appears in this movie, because if you talk about spoilers and you talk about cameos, 4th of July is coming up. It was like the grand finale of a fireworks display where you see George Reeves, holy crap, then Christopher Reeve, Nick Cage making John Schnepp way up there in nerd heaven happy. It was just flying at you. What did you think of all these reveals and previous Batman as well? I mean, we mentioned George Clooney post-credit scene. Did it work for you, like a lot of people, I think, who heard maybe rumblings of this could happen or were expecting some sort of cameo, what their expectations were they met for Coy?
I feel like the Time Dome Psychodrome allowed the visuals to work for me better because I was already in that uncanny valley space. I think I would have preferred like Nick Cage to just be in a filming studio and have it just more Nick Cagey as opposed to like a 2D, 3D rendering of Nick Cage, because I think he physically filmed, but I wouldn't have known that unless I read the trades. Like I would have felt like just as real as George Reeves. And I think part of it was going, okay, we need George Reeves to look as real as Nick Cage, so we have to make Nick Cage look less. I think they had to kind of big glossy, like the old like oil on the lens. I felt like they had to oil the lens for all those
had to
shots.
Kind of
They're like,
mix
let's find
the
a middle
difference.
ground.
Right.
But I would have preferred if it was just you've literally got an opportunity to have a different universe look differently and use different mediums. I would have had George Reeve look more Uncanny Valley because of time. Christopher Reeve look a little bit more real. Nicolas Cage be physically him. And I would have had the more modern mirror the idea of chronology and make it look more real to our eyes. I also would have mixed in other mediums like Batman the Animated Series. That way your brain goes, oh, right, we're experiencing a multiverse. This is why this looks like this. Oh, by the way, let's put in some comic panels because we could have a spinning dome of comic panels, have an Infinite Crisis comic panel spinning, and then your brain is just like, okay, it's stimuli, I get it.
I'll
and you won't
tell you
think-
why I'm thrilled they didn't put Batman the Animated Series in there, and that might be my favorite show of all time. It's like that Monday Night Football might be my favorite shows of all time. But you would never be able to avoid comparisons to Into the Spider-Verse and Across the
100%,
Spider-Verse,
100%.
and we do way too much of this anyway. But I think a Marvel DC comp is warranted when we're talking about the usage of a multiverse setup, and I feel like Marvel's much more guilty of this than DC is, where you in at least live action, we'll say, because I think Across the Spider-Verse is the best movie I have or will see this year.
Agreed.
I've seen Indiana Jones already, Mission Impossible, The Flash. Across the Spider-Verse, best movie I've seen. But Marvel, I think a lot of times we're using the multiverse as just sort of an excuse to get some cameos, have some famous people in our movies.
Yeah.
And with this, I didn't mind all of those super people coming around at the end simply because I feel like we earned our way into this portal by watching Barry and the struggle that character was going through. You know, and this is also somebody who's super young, who isn't fully aware of what their powers are. They have a mentor in the same way that Spider-Man had a mentor in Doctor Strange, but whereas the mentor for Flash, Ben Affleck's Batman, is like, you do not know what you're doing. Nobody wants my parents back more than me. This is not going to go down how you think. Whereas Spider-Man's mentor is like, no, I don't want to do it. All right, fine, I'll do it. And it's like, dude, really? Really?
That's it? That's what it is?
This kid wants his girlfriend, and you're going to like risk the whole It just didn't. Stephen Strange might be the best surgeon on the planet. You ain't operating on this brain.
Nope.
I don't trust you with that decision
Moral
making.
compass, a little skewed.
So I feel like the multiverse is actually used better, or time travel as well is used better with this property than what I've seen from Marvel.
I think it's the most succinct. I honestly think that explanation of the spaghetti is the best explanation I've ever heard for retro-causal multiversal
It helps
impact.
that it's Keaton doing it.
I mean, it definitely helps. Because you're like, tell me more. Read the dictionary, Michael. Like, you're so invested. But also, it's comedic in a way that sometimes Marvel doesn't land, where he's like, I thought this was the cousin's dinner. Genius line, because they're using a food metaphor. And it ties into the metaphor of spaghetti being about what family represents, because he thinks that he would equate that to family subconsciously, whereas Elderberry would relate it consciously because the tomato sauce. The whole movie's about spaghetti and family. It's like Fast and Furious, but instead of Corona, it's spaghetti. Love it. But I also really like that the visual allows the audience that even if the most linear concept of just some things run parallel, some things intersect, you've got a visual that's wiggly. It's so perfect for what multiversal ideas are with the way we actually have time, because having chronological time doesn't work. That's why Marvel had to do the splitting theory. That's why Loki had to re-explain it. That's why Spider-Verse had to kind of dabble in it. But the way you have time
and that's when I call Coy. That's when I'm like, I can't figure this out with the neurons and the synapses in this. It just ain't going to work anymore. So that's why I call you.
We've proven that time isn't linear here on our planet. Like, if you go to a top of the highest mountain and the lowest trenches, time is different. It physically moves differently as related to gravity, because E equals mc squared proved that time is relative just as mass moves things differently.
This will be on the test.
Take notes. So when you have the gravity change the disparate relation to time, because time is something that we experience relatively. Like, for example, when you're a kid and you're 10 years old and your summer feels like it's forever because you've only had 30 months of your life.
Like Batman in 1989. It was everywhere.
It was everywhere. It was the whole summer. But like, if you think about what your experience of time is, say you're 10 years old, summer is 3 months. That means you've lived, 12 times 10 is 120. So you've lived 120 months. So for you, 3 months out of 120 is a marked percentage of your life. By the time you're 30, a month is nothing because relatively your experience of time has changed. So time being relative is never addressed in Multiversal Impact correctly until this movie, because it has to be causally affected on both sides.
Everybody's thinking the Charlie Day gift right now. Just like tying all
What
these
does it mean?
different threads.
Did he give us math?
No, there is a salient point in there. You reach into the pudding and you pull out the red flag like Double Dare. This is how time works, and it works for the story.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just it's not just there for the science nerds, but it's also not there just for fan service. It's there to tell a story. So I guess my next question would be, we got a great ride with this. The box office results were We're nowhere near, I think, what the studio was hoping for or anticipating. So where do we go from here? I think the credit you can give the story in this movie is that it was a nice, clean slate, if that's how James Gunn and Peter Safran want to use it going forward with now the DCU. But before we get there, we have Blue Beetle coming out. We have a new Aquaman movie coming out. We have apparently George Clooney back as Batman. So start with that post-credit scene,
sure,
and then explain maybe where we could be going based on this movie, or was this movie sort of, in your eyes, the close to a very turbulent and sometimes highlight-packed chapter in the DC history?
I think the box office kind of made at the end. I think that if people wanted the continuation of this universe, they should have gone to it, because I think that this is now, they made a movie that ended with a cake and eat it too. It could have continued or it could have closed, and I think this closed it, because the ending, the post-credit scene allows for, hey, you're like this in every universe. Haha, crazy drunk guy. It's a funny scene, but it's basically to say, like, we can keep Aquaman if you guys show up. That's what that scene was. I was like, that's the most studio suit I've ever been. I was like, this scene is literally to say the line of dialogue like Jason Momoa can stay, isn't it? Oh, there it is. That's what that scene was. So now the idea is, we have Aquaman coming out at the end of the year, which I don't know if it's going to do well, because Flash had way more buzz than Aquaman does, and Flash had way better reviews. Tom Cruise was like jumping on a couch like Oprah saying how good it was. That's not going to happen with
Stephen
Aquaman.
King loved it.
It had buzz.
I'm not going to do that to Aquaman again, though, because I wasn't sure what the first Aquaman was going to do, and then it ends up doing $1 billion
yeah,
and being even more successful than the fictional James Cameron Entourage version
which
of
is
Aquaman.
Genius. I love that so much. And I love that James Cameron is actually fighting the box office past Aquaman at one point with Avatar. I love that. But I think that now Aquaman comes out, I think maybe kind of unceremoniously. I don't know if Warner Brothers is going to want to invest a lot more into it. I don't know if they're going to want to throw a lot of money at the press store if this is the reaction they've had at their prior work. I think Blue Beetle, James Gunn has said, is the first DCU character, and that Superman is the first DCU film. So I think this character is going to introduce the world by being very neutral. I don't think they're going to reference other things. I think it's going to be a contained Spider-Man
because we're still
movie.
Sleeping on Superman until 2025.
Yeah. So I think this is going to be like, hey, this guy's here, and if it does well, Sholo gets to show up. But if it doesn't do well, he doesn't. So I think that if you want Blue Beetle in the DCU, people need to show up. I think Aquaman is kind of a bygone, not going to happen. They've said that he's going to stay, but I think they said that when they thought that this movie is going to make $500 million. So I think they filmed that as an either way. I don't think we see George Clooney again. I think that was for us. I think that was for, just like there's a line.
I think that was for him. In the same way that Michael Keaton got to come back and be the Batman that, we could have had 2 or 3 or 4 more Batman movies starring Michael Keaton in the 90s if everybody was on the same page.
Right.
With Clooney, I think that was just him, and he's apologized for being Batman. Like, apparently he'll give fans $20 if you say, hey, I saw that movie. But I think that for him, that was also just like, let me get on the big screen one more time and just kind of wink and nod. I thought the line worked.
Because the line is making fun of him being Batman.
Right,
I love that the only line at him is going like, I know, I'm George Clooney, and I apologize for being Batman. That's the cameo. It's genius. But I think that's why we're not going to see him again, because it wasn't meant to be it was meant to be like, that was end.
Much more of a post-credit scene along the lines of Captain America filming
turning the chair around,
the school video versus something that's actually furthering the story.
Right.
What is the one? If I had to pin it down, so let's say that we are just going to we look at the box office, fans speak with their wallets. It just, the interest isn't there. We got to sort of reboot this thing in Gunn and Safran's vision. What are you going to miss most about the Snyder-Verse, and then what kind of led us to and through this movie, The Flash? So including everything you just got to see, what are you going to be like, I wish there's some way, and maybe there is, that we could at least keep that?
I love how James Gunn casts. I think he's one of the best. That's one of his biggest strengths, is because his movies don't work without exactly the right cast. So I think that's absolutely a strength. I think the DCU is also cast incredibly well. So I would love, if I had my infinite power, if I had the gauntlet, I would have this stay as an Elseworld.
From the other universe.
From the other one, those guys. They cross over the Amalgam Universe. It's a whole thing. I'll teach you that next time. But I think if I had the power, I would keep this as an Elseworld, and I would I want to see Henry Cavill back. I want to see Batfleck back. I want to see Gal Gadot. These casting choices have always meant the world to me, because and I've been very public even on this very channel, I don't see Zack Snyder's characters the same way I see the DC comic characters. I don't have to. That's the point of an adaptation. They are a different take. Therefore, I'm excited to see James Gunn's new take because I think he sees the characters more like I do. So I feel like, selfishly, I'm going to be like, those are the way I've read them. That's how I know them. But that doesn't mean I don't want to see more of these guys, especially since the way Zack Snyder sees them is like, there's always been the Marvel are gods that walk amongst us, and DC is always gods that are above us trying to figure out if we're worthy kind of idea. He took it to another level where it's like, those gods might be pissed too. Like, those gods are like, they're looking down a little bit. And there's commentaries on rage. There's commentaries on like adjusting to your reality. There's so many beautiful metaphors in Zack Snyder's world, but it only works because the casting is like the sexiest people ever born. Like Jason Momoa, Ben Affleck, Gal Gadot. Like, these are gods. Like, they cast these like, Ray Fisher is like an actual quarterback looking like impossibly capable. Charisma incarnate. They cast so perfectly. It's a shame we never got to see them. It's kind of like Andrew Garfield. I always wanted to see Andrew Garfield in a movie where they wrote Spider-Man, because Andrew Garfield is Spider-Man, but studios kept writing Spider-Man. So I love that No Way Home we finally got to see Andrew Garfield get that redemption. I would love if one day we get to see these characters again in a way that feels like they get to fully embody them without the studio juggle, without the things falling apart, it feels like the world engine where they're like collapsing the world around them that Zod's doing is happening to them. They're always like, we're dodging all this rubble and we're just trying to act. And I think they're better than that. I think Zack Snyder's better than that.
And it usually infiltrates at the worst moment when you're trying to promote the movie.
100%.
When you're trying to actually sell this thing. And it's interesting you bring up Andrew Garfield, because we've been doing a new show that I go out and do pretty much just interview people on the street about movies. One of the things with Spider-Verse is I was like, who's your favorite Spider-Man? A lot of folks saying Andrew Garfield. But one of the great joys of doing on the street was we were asking folks about The Flash in Las Vegas. All right. And these are not people like going to CinemaCon. These are just people hanging out in Las Vegas on vacation. And they said, well, maybe I might want to go see it. There's a lot of comic book movie options now. And then I would ask, what if I told you Batman is also in The Flash? And they're like, oh, really? Then they got interested. And then I said, what if I told you Michael Keaton is back? And they're like, now I want to go. The advertising, as much as nerds like you and I enjoy the Super Bowl commercial, I think a lot of people thought it was an actual like potato chip
like Doritos,
or
like
phone
Michael
plan
Keaton
commercial. Because you have like Wayne and Garth back, you have like Office Space, Ferris Bueller's, all these movie properties use the Super Bowl and ad space to just be like, hey, remember that? Buy soap.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of folks saw that and they're like, oh, that's cute, Michael Keaton dressed up for this commercial, not realizing he's actually not just making a cameo in the movie like a lot of other people did, but actually a huge part of the story.
That's what I would do with this. Is I would make it the non-Doritos commercial. What I would do long term is let James Gunn run this universe 10 years and build a true Justice League. Play the Marvel game, have a 10-year plan, build your new universe. As soon as we hit that moment like we did with Phase 3 where it was like, where can we go from here? Have DC have pocket aces. Have this universe ready. Have a Justice League movie that you don't let the people know you're making. Do as much of it you can. You're going to find out they're filming it. But make a full-on Justice League 2 with this cast and then do an Infinite Crisis movie in 15 years, smashing these universes together. That way, the nostalgia we feel for Keaton right now is how we feel for Gal Gadot, how we feel for Jason Momoa. And you save that, and then you get your Earth 1, Earth 2 at DC, and that's James Gunn. He's going to play the long game. So let James Gunn fully build his universe. Don't use any of the same cast members. Don't do any of those things. And then once you've hit that fatigue point, we're like, okay, we've had Darkseid. What do we do? Like, once you've hit that point, you bring these guys back in. You got pocket aces. You have a crisis movie, and then you bring in the TV, the elements they didn't do. You bring back Grant Gustin. You drop your wallet. Bring back Stephen Amell. You make the biggest movie of all time because you keep a good relationship with these people that deserve that second chance. That's what I'd do.
The best part about Coy is he brings his own coffee. We don't have to supply it, but no, I mean all these ideas, and this sounds like you're building a 10-year plan. I think a lot of studios would be like, can we get that guy from who was on the Rotten Tomatoes show in? He comes with me.
Yeah, I pitched the Sony-verse, I think, with Naz. Now I'm pitching my DC-verse. Warner Brothers, you've got my number.
I'm just coming in to be Clooney in a post-credit scene. That's all I need. So thank you so much for joining us. Can't wait to have you back soon. Sooner rather than later here on Rotten Tomatoes. Now it is y'all's turn. Please comment and let us know, what did you think of The Flash? What about that box office? What do you make of that? Who is your favorite character? What were the highlights and the lowlights of The Flash for you? For me, my name is Mark Ellis. My new stand-up special, Alive and Well, drops July 17th everywhere. Special preview event July 7th. In the meantime, you can follow us right here on Rotten Tomatoes YouTube. Subscribe to get that bell for the alerts, all that good stuff. And until next time, for the whole gang here, I'm Mark Ellis saying thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.